Hey everyone, it's that time again. It's time to talk about politics. I had a feeling this was going to end up being one of the longer episodes. Shardlight is a pretty big deal game for Wadjet Eye. It's considered one of the best games they've ever released, usually mentioned alongside Techno Babylon in that same breath, and is also notable for being the brainchild of both Francisco Gonzalez and Ben Chandler, two of the most significant names at the studio. Since A Golden Wake had a more niche appeal, being a historical fiction sort of thing, Gonzalez really broke out with his writing work in this one, cementing him as a major point-and-click name to know by appealing to a wider audience. I'm still trying to line up my thoughts on what my favorite Wadjet Eye games are, especially after playing Unavowed, but Shardlight is most likely in my top 3, and my opinion of it actually improved upon replay, which almost never happens when I do replays of any game. So yes, this is going to be another very gushy episode, but what Shardlight is actually about is going to require a politics detour and some endgame spoilers later, so heads up, we got another somewhat dense episode, and I will warn you when I get into spoilers. The premise laid out is that the world is recovering from a nuclear war, and the country you live in, heavily hinted to be a section of America, it's never really specified, is dealing with massive class divides and a horrible illness called the green lung that's destroying the poor. The only chance of those who catch the plague is to take a lottery job and get a chance at getting vaccination procedures, which is what brings main character Amy Weller to an old power plant for repairs. She meets a dying man there who wants her to deliver something to a person named Anton, which quickly wraps her up in a revolution against the aristocracy who have put the land in authoritarian rule. Also, in a major tone-setting moment, you get to decide if you want to let that man die slowly from his wounds and illness, or put him out of his misery and let him die on his own terms, but come out of it with blood on your hands. It's the exact moment I knew this game was going to be something special.
You can make it right, Amy. Just deliver the letter, and everything will change. You'll see. Thank you. I wish you nothing but the best.
Before Shardlight gets too deep in the heavy political stuff it's playing with, it spends time characterizing Amy and the various people of her town. There's a nice bit where you can just explore her garage and learn about her family and her hobbies, and do some jump rope outside with neighborhood kids and sing nursery rhymes. It's not necessary to finish the game, it's just a cute bit that shows Amy in a more relaxed state, and she ends up being a great change of pace for Wadjet Eye leads.
Cece, my playmate, come scavenge stuff with me, and we'll be jolly friends. Climb up the rotten tree, climb down this ladder into my secret room, and we'll be jolly friends till all goes boom.
Instead of confused and broken people trying to figure out their own issues, Amy is a cheerful person with a well of empathy, though not without a hard outer shell created to wear out the harsh conditions she's known all her life. She treats her friends with reverence or good-natured jeers, but walks carefully around people of power and doesn't take crap from others when things start getting heated. These are normally aspects we take for granted with protagonists, but Amy is special with how much focus is put on the masks she uses around different people, highlighted in a late game sequence where we see inside her consciousness and see a much more troubled and raw person. One moment she can be submissive around someone of power, and the next moment she is standing up for herself and others, without a second thought. More importantly, the theme of perceived identity and mask are all central to the game's main conflict, which Amy helps build. Amy mainly wants to get vaccine treatment for a green lung and finish an old car she was working on with her father before he passed away, but that meeting with the man in the power plant complicates things. The head of the Ministry of Energy, Tiberius, is told about the letter, Amy not aware of who Danton is yet, and she has to act as his spy to report on Danton's activities. Danton is revealed to be the leader of a rebellion that plans to take down Tiberius, and Amy ends up joining them, balancing both sides of the conflict to try and find a way to survive. It's an interesting setup that doesn't initially get as explored as much as I would like, but there's a huge payoff as it goes on. Ben Chandler and Francisco Gonzalez share top billing, with Chandler given credit for art, along with Ivan Ulanov once again doing portrait and photo art, and Gonzalez getting credit for the writing and design. That said, Chandler is also credited for some additional design work, and Gonzalez for some additional art, showing just how much of a partnership this was, though it's hard to pick that out at first. Shardlight has a very traditional point-and-click adventure setup, with clearly evil bad guys the protagonist must contend with while going through a personal arc, maybe with a splash of depth here and there. It feels closer in structures to the Blackwell games, at least at first. It's in the details where the two's personal touches start to come out, and Chandler's involvement helps explain why this game feels so different from a Golden Wake or the later released Lamplight City, among many of Gonzalez's other games. There's not a tragedy arc here, not a heavy focus on personal issues compared to the external threats. It's a much larger game in world scope, but Gonzalez's writing wrangles it back into something much more thought-provoking than expected. The game is also designed and paced very differently than Gonzalez's more solo direction stuff. He likes dividing things into gameplay chunks with story beats as in-betweens, which isn't uncommon in point-and-click, yet almost highlighted with him to divide the game into chapters or episodes. Shardlight avoids this and instead has you more naturally shift from beat to beat, the pacing more defined by turns in outer conflict and not in inner conflict the outer conflict serves. It otherwise sticks pretty close to the inventory puzzle norms, though there's a very clever code cracking bit to get into resistance space early on that actually had me stumped the first time I played this. Amusingly, the one other significant returning name is Nathaniel Chambers, who was last thing composing for Primordia, another game about living after the end of the world. His score is appropriate to a little surprise, but mostly low-key and focused on serving the scene than standing out on its own. The subtlety is appreciated though, fitting with the moody areas throughout the game. The voice cast is also fantastic and filled with so many names I'm not even sure where to begin. Of course, Abe Goldfarb stills the show as Tiberius, using the character's ridiculous design and mentally unstable personality to chew some scenery in surprisingly effective ways. The fact that he can go from angrily screaming to quiet, polite rage and even reserved annoyance is a testament to his experience in acting.
Call her number. But Minister Tiberius, will that work? Surely she's not foolish enough to...
Whether she is or is not of your concern. Just do as I say and call her number. And a word of advice. Question my methods again, and I'll have you hanged from my balcony. Is that clear?
Yes, Minister Tiberius. It won't happen again.
Good. Now get out of my sight. I'm sorry you had to hear that. You know I dislike having to be unpleasant, but sometimes I'm left with no choice.
Shelley Smith Shenroy, who's been around since Blackwell Unbound, does great as Amy, really selling her as authentic no matter what tone she's given to speak in. Felicia Hudson, a newcomer as far as I can find, does solid work as Danton as well, never really showing complexity or depth in her performance, but it fits the character fine. The cast list from there becomes a, hey, I know them parade, as Wadjet Eye regulars all do what they do best, with a few new faces here and there to fill things out pretty well. It's also worth noting that Francisco Gonzalez makes a cameo through the propaganda announcements, a cute place to fit himself in.
Anyone wishing to enter the vaccine lottery may do so by visiting the appropriate ministry and applying for a work.
The game is covered in head to toe in polish, even in the little world building details. I love that people find light with shards of uranium glass, covering the gray and brown landscape in eerie greens. Seeing Amy not even aware of what the world once was does a great job of showing how easily the past can vanish, further really selling the generational divide aspect between Tiberius and Danton. Chandler also uses this setting to create some brilliant screens, my personal favorites being the old mall entrance with all the hellish mannequin hands coming out of the water and the hauntingly empty salt fields. The highlight for me, though, is how the game explores death through the cult of the Reaper. From the first hour, we're made aware of a mysterious being called the Reaper, said to take people to their final resting place and signaled by the appearance of ravens. An entire religion ends up forming around this myth, creating a twisted sort of mirror to Christianity. For these people, death is what they wish for most, though they are not a suicide cult. Rather, they wait together in an old church that was hit with a plane during the old bombings, singing songs and praying to the Reaper as they wait for their misery to end. They aren't evil or even traditional antagonists, but they live lives of apathy. They see the world as unsalvageable. They have lost their loved ones, and they are doomed to die a green lung, among many other horrors. Rather than fight or try to continue on, they gather and try to find meaning in accepting things will end, and finding joy in that. They're a bit unsettling, especially in how they always wish that the Reaper takes you soon after a conversation as a sign of fellowship, but they're not dangerous. People are free to leave upon joining, and they have no desire to hurt anyone. They're all fairly likable and friendly, but their comfort rings false. Their faith comes from desperation and despair, not joy or affirmation. They're antagonists in their own right, a temptation for Amy to surrender to rather than continue on. A clever way to poke at Amy's fear of her morality and wariness and her inability to make real change in the world. Also, they all wear coats and top hats, and that's really cool, and I want that goofy goth magic outfit.
May the Reaper take you!
Of course, the real focus in the story is the political divide between Danton and Tiberius, and that's where the game goes from impressive to insightful. I'll be getting into spoilers from here on out, so you have been warned. I urge you to please play and finish Shardlight before continuing on, because I will be going over all 3 endings as well. With that said, let's go ahead and continue on. One of the most interesting moments in the game occurs after you discover that the ministries are hoarding vaccines en masse, enough to treat the entire population for years. Tiberius meets you in your jail cell upon captures, and he chews you out for getting too involved in the resistance. When you challenge him over hoarding the vaccines, he ends up saying something that took me aback.
Then why are you telling people supplies of vaccine are limited? You could help everyone and work on finding a permanent cure.
Yes, you are correct. And if we were to cure the population and allow our society to thrive once more, what do you suppose would happen next?
It would be great. People could live normal lives again, not have to worry about scavenging or dying of the plague.
Oh, of course. And when a rival nation caught wind of that prosperity and decided we had something they wanted? We would be attacked, experience the horror of war all over again. I would not wish the bombings we experienced on my worst enemy. I cannot let that happen again. I will not let it happen again. Do you understand me, Miss Wellard?
Every single visual signifier and element of Goldfarb performance paints Tiberius as an evil authoritarian who hoards wealth for the usual reasons of greed, supposedly using fascist ideology as a traditional fascist and finding value solely in power. However, while he is an authoritarian and does use some fascist tactics, his ideology is very classical conservative. I don't mean the more modern meanings of conservatism, I mean the original classic version, where value is not placed on individual freedom but order and hierarchy to keep structure in society, moving to progress slowly and with some skepticism. What makes Tiberius the monster he is now is his scars from the old war, having not only seen his country destroyed but also his family. His solution was to remake the country with older social hierarchies and governing structures, even using colonial-era uniforms and powdered wigs. It's an extreme regression, and his need to see himself as a tough but fair guardian and father of this world has clouded his judgment. He can't see that his actions do more harm than good, because he values order over life, and he uses old tragedy as a way to justify his actions for the greater good. When he has a point about war in other nations, he also fails to see that he's arguably doing just as much harm to those in the lower class in his own country as the war did. Danton is closer to Tiberius than you first think, though. I don't mean this in the rather gross Bioshock Infinite way, where they try and make the victim of an ultra-racist society just as bad as their oppressors, which was my initial subtextual reading in the first playthrough. Racism is never really tackled here, which is his own strange can of worms, with the nationalism bringing destruction bent to the story being primed for that, so Danton being black isn't really of significance in the text. Instead, she's a stand-in for authoritarian leftist ideology. As a leftist myself, I feel I need to further explain that. While the country needs a rebellion and change in governing, Danton doesn't seem to have any real plan for how to do that after the initial fighting. She doesn't admit it, but Danton mainly fights for Danton, seeing herself as a hero who has to accomplish a goal and save the world, not unlike Tiberius, just with a different villain. The fact that many rebels seem to have issues with Danton's quick-to-violence attitude further cements this later in the game.
Thanks for the help. He was a tough one. Don't mention it.
Danton sees the problem, but she offers no solution, no actual ideology, except that she shares one single belief with Tiberius, that power decides everything. It's hard to find a real-world comparison I can make for her, since Stalin definitely seems a step too far, since her want for power isn't necessarily selfish beyond her own ego trip, but her actions and plans could be comparable to several chapters of the French Revolution. After the initial victory over the highest class, it wasn't long for the lower classes started slaughtering minor nobles and even some landowners. The major problem was initially solved, but they didn't really know what to do from there, and old grudges ended up ruling. The game isn't arguing that violence is apparent in and of itself, especially with how all three endings play out, but it shouldn't be told to solve the problems by those who inherently value violence as a means of control or their only understanding of justice. At the end of the game, you discover Danton's plan to take some power in the government is to become Tiberius. Before Tiberius called himself Tiberius, he was just a man who created a new system of government where the leaders were people behind masks, easily replaced when one died off to become the new one. In this system, Danton only needs to dress the part once the regional Tiberius is dealt with. Eventually, you have a choice of killing Danton, killing Tiberius, or killing both. Killing Tiberius leads to Danton curing Green Lung, but then starting uprisings with other ministries, causing ridiculous amounts of death in her wake. Killing Danton has Amy sell out to Tiberius for higher status for her and her loved ones, resulting in Tiberius releasing the cure for Green Lung, but not needing control on other supplies to retain control of the populace. Neither are good endings, having you become responsible for wanton slaughter, or keep the way things are and be haunted forever by knowing you've chosen to live as a well-fed slave, as others suffer. Only in killing both does a good ending come about, as Amy becomes Tiberius, working to improve society and keep things in order for the overall good of the nation. Her ideology follows more into socialism, not shaking up the norm too much, but allowing people to live comfortably in it by ruling with empathy. Amy convinced violence throughout the game, and often violent choices are framed as the best ones in given scenarios, or absolutely unavoidable to do something right. However, she understands what violence really is, a terrifying, insulting act that becomes dangerous to normalize. Instead of making a dull both sides narrative that tries to blame the oppressed as equally as the oppressors, Shardlight goes in a much more intelligent direction and examines the importance of valuing humanity and the dangers of valuing power and violence. We're all in this together, and the best thing we can do for each other in the long run is to act in good faith, even if we must sometimes fight for what we know is right, no matter how messy it gets. You just need to find the line before you cross it.
Sometimes I miss the old days when I could just fix cars and stop for a chat with my friends. But at least now, when I look out over the market, I can see them all smiling back at me.
Blood in the water, souls on the skin. First it's you, the next your kin.